Are we on? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to CCCADI's Curators in Conversation, and this is a new public program series by the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, and it's dedicated to critical debate and dialogue and engagement with curators of color who have a commitment to the artistic and cultural production of the Afro-Caribbean and its diaspora. I'm Grace Aneiza Ali. I'm the Curator-at-Large at the Caribbean Center and Assistant Professor of Art and Public Policy at NYU. And as the title says, Curators in Conversation, this is also a platform and a space that CCCADI wanted to create for curators simply to speak with each other about their curatorial practice, about their triumphs, about their challenges, and about the things they want to ask each other and engage with each other about. To launch the series, I couldn't be happier to have these two amazing emerging curators join us tonight. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to hear from Yelaine Rodriguez and Aldeide Delgado. I'll introduce them a bit shortly. And they're going to present and talk about two of their most recent projects. And then we're going to come back with each other and talk with each other about our curatorial practices and about some larger issues happening in the state of the curatorial world. And we can see your questions and your comments, so please send them in the chat and we will be keeping them in mind and coming back to them to answer your questions. So first, I'd really love to share with you a little bit, she's very Googleable, but a little bit about Yelaine Rodriguez, who will start our conversation. Yelaine is an Afro-Dominican American curator and also an interdisciplinary artist, and she will discuss her recent project, Afro Syncretic, which centers the African roots of the Latinx diaspora. And Yelaine, I have to tell you, I was able to see this at NYU, and it was a really brilliant and very important project. So congratulations on all of that incredible work that you did. Yelaine is also the recipient of the Cultural Advocacy Fellowship that is hosted by the Caribbean Cultural Center. So she's already part of the CCCADI family. And she's a recipient of the Latinx Project Curatorial Fellowship at NYU, which she'll also talk about and share with us a little later on. Yelaine also currently teaches at the New School. And following Yelaine will be Aldeide Delgado, who is a Cuban art historian and curator, and she will expand on her recent photography exhibition, Building a Feminist Archive, Cuban Women Photographers in the US, which examines the contributions of Cuban women artists living and working in the United States. And Aldeide, as I shared with you, I tried really hard to make it to it when I was in Miami. I missed it, so this is my second chance of getting to hear from you about the project. Aldeide founded and runs an incredible organization, the Women Photographers International Archive, or WOPA for short. And it's an organization for the research, promotion, and support of Cuban women photographers. I have a couple Cuban women artists and photographers that are very dear to me. So I appreciate this project that you started, this initiative that you started. So we'll also hear a little bit about WOPA from Aldeide later. So Yelaine, I will pass it on to you and we will hear from you.
Great, thank you for that lovely introduction and for the invitation to be in conversation with you guys. It's such an honor to be in conversation with women that are doing amazing work and that are just pushing forward to keep the conversation going. So as she said, my name is Yelaine Rodriguez. I'm a self-identified Afro-Dominican American. I'm a visual artist and I'm also independent curator. I started my curatorial practice in 2013 when I saw that there was a lot of issues going on between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, a lot of social and political issues. And I wanted to find out ways to use my resources in order to be part of the conversation and to bring awareness to the situation. So I started doing that on my own. And along the way, I started applying for fellowships and grants. And recently, the fellowship that I received was through the Latinx Project that was founded by Arlene Davila, who is also a professor at NYU. And I met Arlene a while back when we were at a panel discussing how artists and curators of color can push the conversation forward. And I was there just talking about the issues within museums and the issues of representation and the lack of support that curators like me have, because we want to be part of the conversation. We want to put exhibitions together, but the grants and the fundings are not there for us. And I guess what I said in the panel that time was memorable to her, and she just kept an eye out for me in the future. And in 2019, when I applied to do my master's at NYU, so I'm in the program right now in Latin American Caribbean Studies with a concentration in museum studies. I also applied to the Latinx Project as a curatorial fellow. And I received both acceptance at the same time that summer, and I was extremely happy to just start this new chapter in my life. And I realized that when I was doing the proposal, that I wanted to center the Afro Latinx roots, because even within the Latinx discourse, Afro-Caribbeans tend to be excluded from the conversation or are seen as others. So I really admire what Arlene has been doing to include Afro-Latinx conversation as well. So we can put the slide up of the installation of the show. So the beautiful part about this was that I was able to put this exhibition together, not only as a first semester grad student, but also have it hosted in the building where I will be taking courses as well. And it was really great to be in this building, to take classes, and to also put this exhibition together to show what students at NYU are doing. And as I mentioned, I wanted to make sure that to center the Afro roots in Latinx, in the Latinx discourse. Because I remember a while back, as an artist, somebody in an interview told me that what was I excluding by putting Afro in front of Afro-Dominican? So, and what else would I be? I felt like I was centering my African roots, because the Spanish roots is always implied and always pushed into the agenda in the history books. So even in that, as the way that I describe myself, the way that my artistic practice, but also my curatorial practice, I want to make sure that these conversations are present. The idea for Afro Syncretic was to put a group of artists together that have representation of African traditions in their work, that they were foregrounding African roots in the Latinx diaspora. And we had 9 artists that we selected. We can go to the next slide. We had 9 artists that we selected from the Caribbean. We have a collection of Dominican, Nuyorican, Cuban, Haitian as well work to represent a small section of what the bigger picture of the conversation is. So here we have artist Patrice Encarnacion with her piece El Negro detrás de la Oreja, again showing how Afro experiences in the Dominican Republic tend to be whitewashed. And here this artist with her ceramic pieces of staple food in African cuisine that are tradition in our culture. So the yuca and the plantain, and covering them with Spanish typical wallpaper is highlighting how even our precious, iconic things that represent us cannot hide from the Spanish idea and the Spanish flag covering it. So I really gravitated towards this work. Then the next piece, the next slide, we try to look for artists that were looking at displacement in the city. So here we have a piece by Melissa Misla, who is a New Yorker artist. And this is part of a bigger collection of work, of a bigger body of work called Apartment 90. And we selected La Cocina, where we can, by eliminating the figure, you can see yourself in this piece. It's a New Yorker apartment, but everybody that came to the exhibition felt connected to it, can see themselves in it, can see part of their childhood in it as well. With the Goya beans and the adobo staples that we all see in our household as we were growing up. If we go to the next slide. Another point that we wanted to make with this exhibition was that different standards of beauty that are not the norm. So we had this really amazing young artist named Tiffany, who was still in school at SVA. And her work centers the Black female body in very peaceful but yet political way, because our body has been politicized so much that even if we're just trying to swim and enjoy ourselves, just being human, just living, even that, just because is our body, our representation is politicized. And here she's challenging consumer goods with this piece entitled "What a Real Barbie Looks Like." And if we go to the next slide, this piece with Elia Alba, sculpture pieces, was also very interesting to me because it shows how artists of color are working together. These are hands that she photographed from artists of color in her community, and just highlighting them as well. And the next part, if we go to the next slide, are addressing the romanticization and fetishization of tongue twist when you were Spanish and English speaker. But looking at these and challenging this problematic historical part in our history, this colonial past. But what I love about Fabiola Genly's work is that she's looking at this history, she's confronting this history, but without making her sitter feel, she's empowering her sitter. She's not demeaned by this history. And you can see that in the gaze of the model. And there's so many layers here. This is called rewriting history because she uses paper to create the garments that the models are wearing. So in itself, the dress is a sculptural piece. And she has a lot of symbols of voodoo in this imagery as well. And it was important for me to include Fabiola Genly as a Haitian American artist because of this idea of what does Latinx mean and how Haitian artists tend to be excluded from that conversation. If we go to the next slide, this piece was right next to Fabiola's work, and this Sirone by Jody Mejia, a Dominican artist. Her piece is both an installation and a video, and she's looking at the exploitation of Dominican women. She's always challenging how tourism affects the Dominican population, specifically women, and how they become exotic and forms of objects throughout history. Looking at tropical wallpaper and how and why that has become like a representation of Caribbean culture. If we go to the next slide, I guess this is it. No, there's 2 more slides. I just wanted to address how together these artists are challenging viewers into a dialogue that deliberately pays attention to African diasporic traditions and vernacular cultures. Looking at our historical references, our lived references, because we cannot have, even though I wanted this exhibition to be a celebration of our African roots, we cannot negate our past and the traumas that comes with that past. So in the next slide, you'll see the closing of the exhibition. We had an artist talk where the artists were able to, some of these artists didn't meet each other until this exhibition. I like looking at cross-generational conversations, putting established artists like Elia Alba with young emerging artists like Tiffany and Fonseca together in conversation. And I use these spaces as forms of healing and using my network as well. Over here, you see Winnie Lamour, who is a Haitian Creole language instructor at NYU. And we have been in each other's lives since I started that exhibition of Dominican and Haitian issues and struggles. She just came to the exhibition as an attendee. And since then, we have been seeing each other and working with each other as well. So it was really great to have her come in and teach people about different type of teas for healing and how people were able to engage really nicely. And I think that's it. And that was it. Ta-da!
Wonderful. Yelaine, I'm curious. I really thought what you said about mounting an exhibition in the place where the people you studied it were walking by, the professors you have classes with are walking by, that they're engaging with this exhibition in real time. And so I'm curious, what were some of the responses from the NYU community that you were getting about the show? And then do you feel that you were able to reach a community outside of the NYU academic space for the project?
There was definitely great support from the NYU group. CAX has been very amazing and very supportive, and they promote everything that I sent their way. And we have a lot of conversations in class where there was one point that we were discussing what does syncretism mean. And my professor was like, I really don't like that word. And I'm like, well, my exhibition is called Afro Syncretic and it's downstairs. But it was good to have those conversations in class as well, and to show visually like my side of my culture and what I really love to do. And then definitely people that have seen my work throughout the process were there and were very engaging, and it was really nice to put that NYU group and my other group together.
So we'll come back and talk more. But thank you so much. It was so lovely to see those installation images and images of the opening and closing. So wonderful to see. Thank you, Yelaine. And now we'll hear from Aldeide Delgado on her project on Cuban women photographers. Welcome, Aldeide.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much to Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute for the invitation, and Grace for the introduction, Yelaine for this opportunity to know more about your work, and all of you that are out there and were sharing this space for conversation with us as well. I will focus this 15 minutes conversation in my curatorial work related specifically with the photographic medium, specifically with my project Catalog of Cuban Women Photographers and Women Photographers International Archive. Now I want to invite you to think about 3 specific questions that I always have in my mind when I am in my everyday life. That is, in how many ways we interact with photography today. Do we know how to read image? And what can the framework of feminism offer to a history of the photographic medium? I want to share with you a quote from a conversation between art critic and curator, author of the book Photography Changed Everything, Marvin Haferman, with MoMA's curator of photography, Sarah Meister. And this quote says, "It's hugely important to speak about the history of photography because it's not quite an universal language. We can all probably extract some basic level of information from photograph, but we have to learn to understand how images work and how images are constructed. Who made the picture? Why did they make the picture? Who edited the picture? Who cropped the picture? Who captioned the picture? What pictures did they leave out? And what pictures are being censored? So we need to be aware about the power of image to disrupt our usual quotidian pattern of thought and rearrange, as feminist photo historian Claire Raymond appoints, the cultural structures of power and domination. Can we put the slide, please? Yeah, thank you so much. So this is we're going to the beginning about how specifically we are interacting with a sort of kind of image in our everyday life. I mean, we all take pictures in our Instagram, pictures of food, pictures of fashion pictures. That in a certain way influence in what well, sorry, I am a little nervous because it's very different for me. This is my first presentation, but basically I want to speak about how this or photography are being part of our world, and in that sense how we deconstruct that discourses. So I always thinking also about, for example, as Black women, as a Caribbean women, how photography have been part of that discussion. I mean, I'm sorry, one moment. And how photos? Yes, this is terrible when everything started to came up, but how we specifically, well, how we are producing, how we produce this image, and how as curators we deconstruct the different discourses that image that photograph about how photography have been circulated. So I mix a little words here in a moment. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I will speak about how I started with this project that is Catalog of Cuban Women Photographers in 2013. And it's a project that came up in a moment when discourses about feminism and or even when a feminist perspective about photography was very scarce in the Cuban context. For me, this project brings together for the first time the women that were part of. I am sorry. I feel a little hurt. One moment, please. I don't feel good.
It's all right, Aldeide. It's just me and Jane. Don't worry. Nobody else is here.
It's that this is totally new for me. It's my first time, so sometimes I feel very, very weird. But again, I want to share with you. I want to be comfortable one moment, and I want to share with you all the work that we have been doing. That is not just in that part. It's not just me, but it's part of teamwork. But well, as I said, I started this project in 2013 in a moment when research about feminist photography was very, from a feminist perspective, was very scarce in Cuba. So the project compiles the women photographers from the 19th century to the present. It is a response to a historical patriarchal paradigm that marginalized the creation of diverse subjects. So it focused on the plurality of women voices as a way of rewriting the canon of photography. Thinking about authorship, the narrative of Cuban photography has been predominantly white and male. And conceptually, it focused on the photographic aesthetics of the 60s and 70s, which was defined by a group of photojournalists in association with the political program of the state. So at this moment, photography worked as a political tool, a propaganda tool that basically was legitimate the populist idea of the government and its official iconography. In that term, the project catalog of Cuban women photographers follows a feminist core that was to regain the vision, to shift the axis of attention from women as objects to women as the creators of what is being represented. In that sense, the first start was to go to different archives and find what was that women's contribution. I focus on those women who had contributed to the development of Cuban photography, as well as the political, social, and ideological conditions that influence their participation and the fundamental topics in the work. In this slide, for example, I am highlighting the work of some of the artists that are part of the project, including Ana Mendieta, María Martínez Cañas, María Magdalena Campos Pons, Hilda Pérez, Alicia Rodriguez Albiza, and Abigail Garcia Fayad. All of them, they are women from different generations are part of that project that approximately compiles around 100 women artists, but this is just a representation. We can go to the next slide. So the catalog of Cuban women photographers works as an interactive platform that offers information for artists, curators, critics, and other cultural producers through a dynamic database of photographers, publications, and exhibitions. You can find the artist profiles with a biography, the statement, and a selection of 15 images. And also we have rescued a wide number of publications related to feminism, photography, and gender, as well as monographic studies of various women photographers. I highlight here the work of Magda Maria Perez, who is a very well-known Cuban women photographer and is recognized as one of the pioneers of contemporary Cuban photography. Her work, according to the art critic Juan Antonio Molina, introduced the gender perspective in the Cuban scenario. And for me, her photograph constitute an transnational archive about the place of the myth and religious practice of African American descent in the feminine psychosocial landscape in the Caribbean region. So we can go to the next slide. After being working with the project of catalog of Cuban women photographers for about 7 years, I created that during this process, I presented the project in different spaces like the New School or California Institute of the Arts, CalArts. I decided to fund, in partnership with visual artist Francisco Massó, the nonprofit organization Women Photographers International Archive, which is focused in promoting and researching, supporting and educating about the role of women and those identified as women or non-binary in photography. We can go to the next slide, please. through, basically here I am showing some image about how I have presented part of the results of the project of catalog of Cuban women photographers in different places. For example, the Curator Museum here in Miami. And if we go to the next slide, last year we presented the project also at the Tate Modern as part of the conference Women and Photography. And through the 4 programs that the organization have, we encourage the exhibition, collection, and active scholarship of works by women photographers, and empowers art historians and curators to share them more frequently with the public. We have a strong focus on historical research and producing rigorous academic content with a particular emphasis in the diverse artistic production of Latin American and Latinx communities, including photographers from Mexico, Central and South America, the Caribbean, and artists of Latin American descent living and working in the US. We can go to the next slide. So as the primary aim of the catalog of Cuban women photographers is to locate, document, and acknowledge gaps in information on the contributors to the development of Cuban photography, WOFA intentionally expand these efforts to an international scale. WOFA and at the same time create a space for the celebration of women in the photographic arts through the collaboration with other institutions, so other organizations, sister organizations that have that share a common goal with the organization. So for me, it's so important take advantage of the geographical strategic position of Miami in the crossroads of the Americas. In this sense, I remember one of the ideas of one of my colleagues that she always speak about how we are redefining the notion of international. And for me, I follow the idea of the borderland as described by the Chicana feminist poet and theorist Gloria Anzaldúa, and thinking about the idea of the third space or the third country. So for me, WOFA is located in a borderland, a place where people from different cultures or different identities occupies the same territory, a place where language cross-pollinate and are revitalized, a place that challenge the patriarchal and white conventions. And in that sense, I embrace the political dimension of the borderland as a space where a new consciousness can emerge. So following this idea, I created this exhibition, Building a Feminist Archive. Basically, I focus at that moment here in Miami, we had the Latinx art session that happened, and symposium, a 2-day symposium that happened at the Perez Museum, Miami, and having all this background about Cuban women artists, and myself experienced this process of transformation and adaptation to a new place. For me, it was so important to create a space, a platform for having the experience of these artists. So the exhibition featured 9 women artists whose work in photography provides a glimpse into diverse stories of migration, community, activism, and resistance. These Cuban women artists have lived and worked in the United States in the 70s, when the concept of a collective Latino identity became crucial. They started to attend art schools such as the Art Institute of Chicago, and found themselves inspired by and responding to the social movement of their time. They created new image of their communities and examined pluricultural experience, challenging the notion of being exclusively Cuban or American. Digging into the idea of the archive as a traditional repository that legitimates a patriarchal construction of history, the show revealed, and this is something that was so important for me, revealed artwork that was never been seen before, or that was being exhibited for the first time, for saying another way. And at the same time, promoted reflection on the social, cultural, and political identities of Cuban women artists in the United States within the current discussion of Latinx art. I will highlight some of them works in the show that were followed this idea of the borderland, of that space of communication of different identities, and also that were pieces exhibited for the first time in this space. And that's the case of the San Francisco Urban Portrait Series work by artist Carlota Bolcher. She emigrated to the US with her family at the age of 15 in the year 1960, and soon thereafter pursued higher education in philosophy and printmaking in Madrid and Paris. Inspired by the growing movement of cultural and sociopolitical unrest that was happening in the US, specifically in San Francisco during the 70s, she moved there. And this series evidenced how in the early 70s, the concept of family, identity, gender, and sexual orientation were renegotiated and recreated by the emergence of a new sense of community. We can go to the next slide. Other of the special work in the exhibition was this work when I established this dialogue between the work of Nereida Garcia Ferraz, Ana Mendieta, and Aurora de Mendy through the collaboration with the special collection of the University of Iowa. We have the opportunity to show this the thesis of Ana Mendieta, who was focusing her series Siluetas, that was made in Mexico, and that shows how the artist got inspired with this space, with this other country when during her stay there. Also, it would be so important for me, I have little time, but it was so important for me to bring this series of El Picnic by Nereida Garcia Ferraz, and how this whole work was focused on the idea of community, collective experience, and how the artists were establishing collaboration with other artists from other places as part of that problematization of what does mean to be a Latina in the US. If we go fast to the next slide, please. I would like to highlight this work, too important, by artists Juana Valdez and Maria Magdalena Campos that we have in the show, specifically the work of Maria Magdalena, how it refers to where the influence of the artist from the Afro-religion, the Santeria specifically, and how in this work, she refers to this, that was another of the concept in the show that was important, specifically considering the significance of the oral story. And that's something that came in the different stories around the exhibition, how these artists lost their the physical contacts with their homeland, and how they approach to photography through the oral stories that were shared by their family in some cases, and in other cases by photography. So that's an important series. And to end, I would like to highlight the work by Coco Fusco in collaboration with Now Bustamante. That was this work was presented for the first time, where we printed that work for the first time for the show. And previously, Coco Fusco made this work for a special edition of the magazine Atlantica International that was focusing Latin American art. In this case, she was studying about the phenomenon of prostitution in Cuba, and in collaboration with Now Bustamante made this project about to challenge the hypersexualized vision of the Latina women in the US. So this is very broad perspective and general perspective and nervous perspective about the show, about my work in general. And when I hope to have the opportunity to continue speaking during the Q&A session.
Thank you so much. That it's, I have to tell you, what you're doing is such a model. I think I'm from Guyana and I work a lot with Guyanese photographers. And what you've done for Cuba and Cuban women photographers with this initiative, Aldeide, is such a beautiful model for what I hope can be done for Guyana and Guyanese photographers. So thank you for carving out that model. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And I didn't realize 7 years that's not a lot of years. You've managed to take this initiative globally, so to the Tate Modern, to the Goth Institute I've seen, to the Perez Museum. So you've managed to take this project nationally and internationally in a very short time. So it's really beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I want to step back a bit. Thank you for sharing details about those two projects and the fellowships and how they came to be, and the initiatives. I thought we could step back a bit and talk about what curators do behind the scenes before the project gets to the walls and before opening night and the artist talks, right? And so all of you are familiar with the proposal. Right? We write the proposal and make the case to the institution, to the gatekeepers, to the museums of why this project should be seen by the particular audiences that they cater to, and whether that's the larger museums or a smaller nonprofit art institution like CCCADI. I really think that process deserves a lot more transparency than it gets, because there's so much back and forth that goes on in those communications. And problematically, a lot of that communication is about, is this work valuable to this institution? Even that is a problematic question, right? Is this project, is this narrative that your exhibition is showcasing, should it be in front of that particular audience? And so I wanted to ask you if you can share a little bit about, whether it's these particular projects or Yelaine, if it was another project, what that process has been like for you to go from exhibition proposal to exhibition on the walls. And Yelaine, let's start with you.
Good question. I like working for myself. So I've been doing a lot of, like, my curatorial practice when I first started, it was basically just me writing it, sending it out, and I work in very unconventional galleries where there wasn't a board or anything like that. So I was pretty much free to do whatever I wanted to do. And as I started getting recognition for the projects that I was curating, and I was funding them out of my own pocket, just working a 9 to 5 and using those funds to conceptualize these things, these exhibitions. That really became my portfolio, and then I started working with institutions. My first project working with a group was at the New School, because I went to the New School for undergrad, and I was invited to co-curate with a group of women of color to do an exhibition that highlighted the alumni of color at the New School. And that was kind of like the first time that I worked with a group and we discussed which artists to put in. And I realized that it depended a lot on our interests and what we what we gravitated towards. I had a history of working with Dominican and Haitian artists. So when I brought up my list of artists that I wanted to show, they were mostly Dominican or Haitian artists. And that in itself is interesting because it shows you the like what else you need to learn and what other artists are out there as the network keeps growing. And working with the Latinx Project as well, having a team. I just think that it doesn't matter how different your personality are and if you step on a few people's toes, as long as everybody really focused on making a great exhibition. And I've been very lucky to work with people that our common goal is to make sure that the exhibition is as best presentable as possible. But so I kind of went into curatorial in a very different way, in a very like do-it-yourself type of way. And that really put me in a bubble of like, oh, I'm just doing this, I'm writing this, I'm working with friends that can help me with like the graphics. But now that I'm like really going into like institutions and working with a team, it has shown me like a different side of it. And they both have its good and bad, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, in my case, I would say that primarily my experience doing proposal depends a lot of the strategies of sorority and that we can develop between our network. I think, for example, in this exhibition at Bailey Contemporary Arts, how the person, the chief curator of that space, approached to me, focused on the project, and how she got interested about what were all the work that we were doing and the significance of this space. So we create a kind of complicity because from which we were doing in this case. So that's one of my experience, that part of this experience that from Latin America, we also call as economy of friendship in a certain way. And I like a lot because it's about how we redefine the strategies of work. That's the same way that we can collaborate with another artist. And I am always thinking all these things in terms of redefining my practice when I say that I work from a decolonial and feminist perspective. I think, okay, how we can challenge that position or that strategies of work between us, or even thinking about femininity. I develop, or I trust in that complicity that we can establish, specifically when there are specific topics that may not be from the total approval of for example, the board of that institutions, thinking, for example, if we want to show work that is provocative or that have a nude, that I think this is one of the challenge where we work with women artists, that in some cases the work still results problematic for that board of the museums or institutions. So how we can renegotiate that spaces, how we can tell the discourse about the work to, in that way, at the end, allow that the exhibition happens. So that's one of the parts. Part is a big conversation with that contact person in that institution, in the way that we communicate about how the exhibition will go. And the other part is through, as a result, for example, of fellowships. In 2017, I won the production and critical essay by Teoretica. This organization focused on promoting Central American art. And for this show, for this research, I was focusing the other of my passions, that is abstract art, and specifically the process of development of an intellectual thought in the Caribbean, specifically in Guatemala. We're thinking in Central America, in Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Cuba. And as a result of that process, I got invited to present a show in the Miami Biennial. So this is, for example, two scenarios in which my work, that process of submitting a proposal that also came through the open course, is the different ways in which I have worked.
So speaking of boards, right? If you're paying attention to the news, there's a new reckoning happening with a new museum, a new arts institution every day now, and I think it's a good moment. Reckonings are always great moments, but I think it's a particularly really good moment for what we're seeing in the museum and art world. And so there's this moment of disruption, right? This moment of a call for action that museums and art institutions that haven't already begin to aggressively do the work of moving away from these oppressive legacies and practices and instead center, Black artists, center Indigenous artists, center artists of color, that they actually begin to do that work. I haven't seen anyone particularly bringing up our particular geography yet, the Caribbean and the diaspora. And so I'm wondering what you all think of this moment of disruption. Do you think, are you hopeful? Are you cautious? How do you see it benefiting the work and the particular niche that you all are involved in terms of Afro-Caribbean art?
Well, I would say that besides beyond thinking about if this moment will be beneficial for us, I would ask for how long. And this is, for me, is about how the different initiative of the different claims that we may doing now in terms of reclaiming action for the institutions, how that becomes in a long-term process and not just in something that is part of a trendy moment. Or, for example, if we started to see this whole initiative focus on project about Black people and our experience, that's great, because we need that spaces, but also we need that spaces to be to have that continuous support, not just a matter of 1 or 2 years, or we need a long support in that sense. And also recognition of the other institutions that have been, because the other part is that all this support may be going to the big institutions. So we need to recognize that there are a lot of other persons, individual, independent spaces that have been doing an incredible work about promoting our history, and that people need support at this moment also. So that's my opinion in that term.
Yelaine?
Yes, I completely agree with you on that. And I feel also that this current situation in the pandemic just kind of like shook it and revealed everything that we already knew was going on in these big institutions and in the boards. And I hope that this pressure, like just to mirror what you were saying, I hope that this pressure does make them reevaluate how to change their boards, because it's not only about artists being represented, but being represented in the background as well. Having people that look like us in the board, making decisions to be gatekeepers for artists of color to enter into these spaces, and for museums to be held accountable about their racist past as well. Just thinking about the bigger institutions, but definitely not forgetting the smaller ones and how we can help each other. I've seen artists gather together to for fundraising for the museum in California as well, I believe. So how we can mutually help each other out. But I don't know if I'm hopeful. I just hope that that we just get aware, that we are aware of the situation, but what actions are we taking individually and collectively?
I want to just acknowledge our chat. Miss Paranoia wanted to remind us that we're also not talking or acknowledging Latinx Black museum educators when we have this discussion too. So it's curators, it's artists, but it's also the education staff, the folks that are helping the audiences interpret the work, and how political that role is and important that role is. So Ms. Paranoia, thank you for that comment. In that same on that same topic, I want to ask you about how you see your role as a curator in terms of designing the public programs of your projects, designing the audience engagement initiatives of your project. I mean, the curatorial role is already a very heavy, responsible, mind-boggling, sleepless nights kind of role, right? And in addition to that, you do have to think about how do you get an audience to engage and interpret and understand and communicate with the narratives that you are putting forth in the project. And so I wanted to talk to you about your own personal sense of how do you engage public programming? How do you engage with the education staff? How do you engage around these ideas of audience engagement? And Yelaine, I'll start with you because I love that you have this duality where you are a curator, but you also understand it from the role and the position of an artist, right? So you're thinking of audience in these two ways, as a curator and as an artist yourself.
What was the question? How to engage the audience?
How do you approach public programming for your projects, audience engagement, education initiatives for your projects?
Okay, so good question. So thinking back of the last comment of museum educators, I also have taught in the Person Scholars Program, and is a program that engages with students of color from sophomore high school year to senior high school year. So I try to always bring that demographic into my exhibitions, reaching out to different institutions to do educational tours. And that way I take those spaces as an opportunity, those exhibitions as an opportunity for education and learning. Because I feel like there's a lot of misrepresentation about Afro-Latinx individuals, and by grabbing the attention of the youth at that age is really important for me. So I cater to those type of artist tours. And then to engage the bigger audience, I reach into my community and like with the Haitian Tea Party and see how we can bring our networks together and try to do things that haven't been used or seen in exhibitions, kind of bringing the home things that we do at home, like sitting around and drinking tea with each other, bringing it from the home to the gallery spaces and making people feel safe and open to have these conversations. That's it.
Aldeide?
You, Yelaine. Okay. I agree with you, Yelaine, and I have thinking a lot about where this. Always, I think about how interact with the audience, and specifically for me, it's too important the communication that we can establish with universities. As WOFA, for example, is where our base of the base of the organization is as part of that conversation with other spaces and other institutions. We rely on the communication that these different spaces already have, but also as an archive ourselves, we work in ensuring that all the labels, all the information about the work is available for the audience. Putting that information, for example, in English and Spanish here in Miami is so important to make people feel that they are welcome in that space. And also, I am always open to all kind of discussion through different conversations, artist talks, but also tours to different groups that come to the institution. And I think that is important to have the exhibition as an open-ended process. That's part of the other ideas that I have been thinking a lot about how we get the exhibition to continue working beyond the space of the gallery. So in that term, thinking about how we collaborate with other spaces, other institutions, how we mobilize, how we approach to the other spaces in the community that we are located.
And on that note, I know you've been thinking a lot about this, Alba, because you're proposing traveling the Cuban show. So we're all in a moment where we don't have walls, at least not brick and mortar ones, right? And so we're all figuring out what do we do without brick and mortar walls. And so I wanted to ask you all, in this moment that we're in, it's very challenging, but I think also a bit of an adventure to think outside of the walls. How are you embracing your practice now with this very, very difficult challenge of not having, we went from not having enough spaces to literally not having the walls. So how are you embracing your curatorial practice? Is it shifting? Are you holding on, waiting for spaces to open up again? How has it impacted your practice?
Go first?
Oh.
Go first, yes.
Okay, well, in my case, as I think that we need to look up in the history of contemporary art. For example, there are a lot of artists that have been challenging the institutional space for a while. And I think in this project by Liliana Porter, and for example, with the experience of male art, and how in my case, working with photography, we can print that, we can print the work by different artists, and using, for example, the postal mail to trying to engage another type of experience with the artwork and the audience. Also, as for us, online, being online has been a crucial part of the organization of my projects. Catalog of Cuban Women Photographers works online. We have, so in that term is just how we can redefine this experience through doing projects that may be more consequence with the moment that we are living, or for example, how we activate our social media, that we have implemented a new program that is by doing takeovers in the social media of Wofagram, and every week different artists is sharing their work in that platform. But that's a way to provoke or to use the different tools that we have at this moment to redefine the curatorial experience also. And I need to learn, because as I tell you, this is my first experience doing a video conference, but we are trying to create different online, for example, courses, or how we use also this channel to explore another kind of curatorship.
Well, I've been pushing off projects, but I've been writing a lot and developing, trying to sit down with my thoughts about the current situation and how I want to reflect, or how I want to or just reaching out to artists and seeing how they're dealing with the current situation, looking at the work that is being produced now through the confined spaces that we're in. So I'm doing studio visits virtually, but it's been a nice opportunity to sit down and write, process these ideas and what the artwork is going to look like when we go back into the spaces.
I want to jump in with one of our questions from one of our viewers. And Aldeide, this is for you in the Cuban project. What was Ana Mendiada's thesis about, and what was Iowa like for her? And this is being asked by Angel Roman. Thank you for that question, Angel.
Well, thank you so much. The thesis by Ana Mendieta was was about her. Okay, was what was Iowa like for her? Well, she that thesis was during her years of studying at university, and then she made this project in collaboration with Hans Breder, her professor and partner. And the thesis was focusing the Silueta series, that basically is this work that she developed during her stay in Mexico when she were traveling there as part of her experience as a student and get connected with the landscape in that space. So the Siluetas is you may know about this project, but it's a reflection about the Afro religion, and also how she used their body as an exploration of the landscape in relation with the land art as well. So for us, it was a great opportunity to have that communication with the university and the possibility to have the thesis in the show. I don't know if I respond to the question, but.
And Yelaine, I think this is a good question for you, especially in the master's program at NYU. This is from Kim Yantis, and she's asking, do you have a comment on how graduate programs and music universities can improve, and how have you, as a curator, been involved with universities and BFA, MFA programs? I'm guessing she's talking particularly about maybe curatorial programs, but I think a little bit of curatorial work is offered in your program at NYU.
Well, I'm in museum studies at NYU as well, and I've been talking to my advisors from both CLACS and museum studies, but specifically in museum studies about what is being taught in the university. And I'm very open to tell them like what I feel is lacking and how I feel like my story is not being presented. So I've been encouraged to continue to be vocal. And they have tried to connect me with people that are already working in the university, professors that are already there, to start to see how they're dealing with it and to see how I can eventually like break through into the space. But I think definitely having professors that are focused in these subjects of Afro-Latinx education or Afro-Caribbean roots, that their work is centered on that, to hire them as professors, because I definitely have not, well, with the lack of Miriam Basilo, she's a New Yorican professor in museum studies. With her, I think she's like the only one that I've had, and I've already been there in 2 semesters. So I think hiring people as professors roles is very important, because then you see yourself in the future represented as well. You can envision yourself there. So I think definitely they need to work on that.
We have about maybe 10 more minutes with each other. I have one last question for you, and then we'll see if any more questions come in from our audience. And then I'd love to see if you two of you have a question for each other that you want to ask each other. Well, my question to you, and I shared this quote with you all earlier. One of the curators that I really admire is Candace Hopkins, and she's a curator whose practice is devoted to contemporary Indigenous artists, and I think she's just doing incredible, groundbreaking, long overdue work. And I'm really moved by how she defines the practice of curating, and she defines it as a space of listening, that her curatorial practice is a space of listening. Something so simple, but I think so incredibly profound and political, because there's so many questions from that definition, right? Who is being listened to, and who is doing the listening, and what are we listening for, right? And so I wanted to ask you all about your thoughts on how you define your curatorial practice, and what is the ethos underlying your curatorial practice. Yelaine, let's start with you.
I was thinking about it.
Okay.
I feel like that's a really interesting quote of like, who is listening and who are you speaking to as your audience. My drive definitely comes from an upbringing that had very little representation of Afro-Caribbean women and Afro-Caribbean women in the arts. So I always, even though I went to the New School and I studied abroad in Paris and in Central St. Martin's, all these very like Eurocentric education, after I graduated, I felt that my education didn't actually begin until I was going into the studio and interviewing artists like Sherazade Garcia, and just listening from her stories of her upbringing in the 90s as an artist, as a woman in New York, as an immigrant as well. And those conversations that I had with them, with these artists in their studios, very intimate conversation, that's what I wanted to bring into the gallery. I wanted those stories to be told within these spaces and to share that community. So I guess I was having a conversation with my little self. I'm like, what do you want to see in museums? And I realized that if I was having these questions and that I thought that my education was still lacking even after graduating from the New School, that many other people probably felt the same way. So that's how I approached it.
Thank you. Aldeide?
Well, I have been speaking when I think during the presentation about it. For me, curatorship is a way of writing and rewriting history. I think, of course, I am always seeing in the way that we receive our knowledge about our history. And I always ask myself about, okay, where are the people that looks like me or has similar preoccupations or different projects or different ideas that can resonate in what in terms of our experience or also thinking about our background or different history or layers. So this is my approach, is always thinking about how I can contribute to that discourse, to that big discourse, which is my voice. And that's why also from this experience to going, as Yelaine relates, this experience of going to the different studios and knowing the work of different super talented artists that deserve to be recognized. So I have that responsibility to be a medium to show the world, to offer a platform, to give a space for visibility from these artists. So yeah, that for me, the way in which I work as a curator, giving a space to others.
Thank you. And as we wrap up in our last few minutes, do the two of you have any questions or comments or reflections for each other? I know you're meeting each other digitally for the first time and seeing each other's projects for the first time. And so if there's anything the two of you would like to ask each other, please do.
I don't have a question right now, but I definitely know they're going to come up later. But I just want to say that I admire the work that you're doing. It's very powerful and very admirable to see that you're, documenting these stories. Just thinking about friends that are doing their research topic in Cuba and not having these resources because they're not available to them. It's really great to see that you're doing the work and that you're making it available for other people to use as archives and resources as well.
Well, thank you. And I will say that my question to you is, how do you approach to your artist practice and your curatorial practice? How, for example, of course there is a relation, but also do you include your work in different, I think this is it's the question that I have right now, but for example, do you include your work in conversation with other artists in the exhibition that you curate?
When I first started in 2014, I didn't incorporate my work. I think like in the first 3 exhibitions that I've done, but then I slowly started removing myself from that, as I just felt like I wanted to make sure that if I'm already curating, I don't want to curate my own work. And I want to, in that wall space, I didn't want to take that wall space from others. So I made it a point to try to implement as much work from other individuals that haven't had the opportunity. And because I've had the opportunity to showcase my work with other curators. And then my work does relate, like my artistic practice is heavily influenced by Dominican and Haitian culture, visibility of women in fashion, and art, like wearable fashion pieces. And definitely I take my influences from, because my BFA is in fashion design. and that, like being in the industry and seeing that there was a lack of representation of women of color in these spaces, in these photographs. So I definitely like take from both sides and like weave them together.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge.
You photography also. I saw it in your website.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you to Jose Rivera, who's saying that the Caribbean Cultural Center not only tells the story, but it does so with an Afrocentric lens that embraces both Africa and the Caribbean. So thank you, Jose, for that. And Yelaine, we have a question directly for you from Henson Ortiz. And he would like to know, what do you like about the current work you're seeing being produced in the pandemic?
I like that that the work is becoming like very raw and very personal, because people are sitting down with their thoughts. And there's one particular artist that I've seen that she's finding ways to engage with her community. With Tiffany Fonseca, she was the one that did the what a real Barbie looks like. So she's been doing this quarantine series where she asked people to take photographs in their space where they're currently quarantining, and then she draws them. And I think that's a really good way of still having some type of social communication with people and a social life, but also producing work and just showing how self-care looks like for different individuals. So I really like that series that she's doing.
Well, unless we have any last questions from our viewers, looking at the chat. No. I want to remind you all and everyone watching and listening that the Caribbean Cultural Center has launched its application for its curatorial fellowship in Afro-Caribbean art, and the deadline has been extended to July 10th. And so what we're looking for is to gather a cohort of incredible curators like Yelaine and Aldeide, who are invested in the Afro-Caribbean and show a really beautiful commitment and dedication to the artistic and cultural production of those geographic spaces. So go to the website on CCCADI.org and you can share that application, share that fellowship. And it's actually one of the few fellowships that are particularly devoted to curators that are invested in this particular body of work. So we hope to see you apply. Yelaine and Aldeide, I want to thank you so much for, first of all, doing this amazing work and then taking the time to share it with us. And some of you for the first time digitally. So you did great. You're a pro. You did great.
Oh my God. I feel weird because well, I am I like always to have this kind of conversation with the physical presence, or even this process of isolation, almost 4 months or 5 months in quarantine at home. So it may have its effects.
Yes. Thank you for Pamela is thanking you both for all of the incredible work that both of you are doing. We echo that. Thank you for sharing your time and your work with the Caribbean Cultural Center. And I think Yelaine and I have to go because the fireworks have started. So if we wanted to continue, they wouldn't be able to hear us.
We'll continue.
Thank you, everybody, for joining
Thank you so much.
listening to us, and thank you both so much for being with me tonight.
Thank
Good night, everyone.